This episode is sponsored by Linode. Linode is offering listeners of this podcast a $20 credit, which is good for 4 free months at their lowest plan. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for $5 a month. You can get your servers in any of their 10 data centers, and their high memory plans start at 16 gigabytes. Get a server running in under a minute. They do hourly billing with a monthly cap on all plans and add-on services like backups, node balancers, Longview, etc. VMs for full control, running Docker containers, encrypted disks, VPNs, etc. You can run a private Git server. They provide native SSD storage, 200 gigabit network, and Intel E5 processors. They have 24/7 friendly support, even on holidays, and a 7-day money-back guaranteed. So go check them out at linode.com/JavaScript Jabber. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of My JavaScript Story. This week we're talking to Kitson Kelly. Kitson, do you want to say hi?
Hello.
Now, should I call you Kit? Kitson?
Well, Kit, yeah. Kitson
Whatever.
is on the business cards and Kit to everybody else.
Right. And you work at SitePen. We had you on episode 277 of JavaScript Jabber, talking about Dojo 2. Anything else you kind of want to give us by way of introduction before we get going?
No, that's I'm CTO at SitePen and been working on Dojo 2 for the past couple of years. So
awesome. And we'll probably dig a little bit more into what that is. And people are welcome to go check out the JavaScript Jabber episode as well. As we talked, that episode is from September of 2017, which was a few months ago, but we're a little bit ahead on My JavaScript Story these days, so probably more than a few months old by the time you get it. But yeah, let's go ahead and dive in. So the first question that I typically ask guests on this show is, how did you get into programming?
Oh, well, I was standing in a large retail shop stealing Atari 2600 time in the displays, typing away. I think my mom actually was taking some accounting courses, which had some basics of programming, and was bringing home these basic manuals. And I'd sit there and 8-9 years old, write down sort of basic programs and sneak off to while my mom was doing the shopping to steal time on a 2600 and sit there and type in basic programs and hopefully get something working by the time my mom was ready to go.
Oh, that's funny. Nice.
Yeah, and I think my parents finally relented and bought me a TRS-80 Color Computer 3.
Hot stuff.
Yeah, it had, I think, 6K RAM and or 8K RAM, and we upgraded the. It's like it was a big project with my dad to upgrade the thing and double the amount of memory it had in there. And, those were the days.
8K RAM, that was like ripping fast, right?
No, well, yeah, well, and but you still had to, because the only sort of it was cassette tape for loading programs, and the old cassette recorder motor was inconsistent, so my dad had to drill a hole in it and so that you could adjust the timing of the motor, and if you were lucky you got something to load in about Donkey Kong about 30 minutes later, and hope the computer didn't crash. So either that or you got a computer magazine and sat there for the whole weekend typing it in and hoping that that you hadn't made any mistakes. Right.
So I'm curious then, this sounds like, it's a neat hobby as a kid. How do you get from there to professional coder?
Well, I mean, I kept, through school and that sort of thing. I mean, it was the nerds kept hanging out together, and so I made a lot of friends. Got to high school, and we especially at the time. I was getting to high school, which was in the late 80s, had graduated in 91. We had a 20 gig hard drive that we shared in the computer lab, right? It's like, wow, and I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and the number of times I left my homework on floppies on my car seat and had it melted in the sun, and other embarrassing moments. But we started to. It just kept with it, and one thing ended up leading to another, where I always kept close to it, though it was never an intention, right? It had always been a bit more of a hobby to me, and then I realized that people would actually pay me for my hobby. But even then, it took a long time for it to become my day job, actually.
Right. So yeah, do you have a computer science degree then, or?
Well, I which is not something I would recommend to a lot of people. By the time I got done with high school, I was like, this pay me thing and having money in my pocket, and I tried to go to, I couldn't get accepted at a 4-year university, and so I thought, okay, well, I'll go to community college. And my parents were a bit disappointed that this really smart kid was only going to community college, but I was working at Radio Shack. Oh, those were the glory days.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, I'm going to make a career. I'm going to become a Radio Shack manager, and my life is going to be good. And having money in your pocket and having a car and all those sort of things, I was like, well, this school stuff is not what it's all cracked up to be. And so I did about a semester and a half, and I was trying to get a computer, as computer science, but doing real things and earning real money was far more interesting. And so I dropped out and kept taking odd jobs for a number of years, up until the point where I ended up working in a tech support call center, an outsourced call center for Apple. That's where I started going down and keeping, more aligned to technology. And I got recruited by a headhunter and moved to Chicago and started working for a consulting company where I ended up getting far more specialist knowledge in sort of computer telephony integration. It wasn't even programming. It was a lot of system design and system configuration and that sort of thing. But I always kept programming as a hobby. But it was a lot of hard work, sort of those first 10 years of where, if I had a degree, actually I had a lot of challenges getting, sort of promotions into more senior roles because I didn't have a degree, right? Any degree, even if it wasn't computer science, would have unlocked a lot of doors earlier in my career. So everything for me was really, I spent 9 years in working my way up in the consulting company, where I probably could have done it in half the time if I'd had a degree and started off off on the right foot.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because a lot of our listeners, and I get asked by people who are getting into the field now, right? And it's like, do I need that computer science degree? And my answer is generally, well, no. Some companies place a lot of value on it, some don't. And so, I just kind of like to highlight, okay, look, we've got a successful person who's, you're CTO at SitePen. You're doing all kinds of interesting things now with Dojo and all of the other things that you guys have going on at SitePen. And you don't have a computer science degree. So yeah, it might have taken you a little bit longer to climb the corporate ladder, so to speak. But, at the end of the day, it doesn't preclude you from being able to come into the field and do awesome stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's probably only those first sort of 5-6 years that you're out there grinding it out, right? Where people are going to go, well, do you have a degree? And then it's like now, if anybody were to, if I were to look at any, they're looking at the fact that I've been doing it for such an extended period of time that isn't even a question of a degree is not a limiter. I think having some sort of secondary education, at least at a little bit, is, especially when you're in those early jobs. I think good companies don't care what it is as long as you have the right attitude. But in a lot of ways, that sort of proving that you can stick with something, which I couldn't when I was 18, 19, is what a lot of those companies, are looking for. If they're going to say, well, unless you have a computer science degree, and that's the thing is almost everything that they teach you in computer science, almost invariably those courses are a good 4 to 5 years behind. Where the real world is.
Yep.
So even if you do have that degree, sort of plan to forget everything that you've learned.
Yeah, it's funny. My brother is going to Utah Valley University getting a degree in computer science. And it was so funny because he looks at me and he's like, I've really been struggling with my discrete mathematics course. And it's a computer science course. And I looked at him and I said, well, what kinds of things are they covering? And he's like, oh, well, we're writing proofs for algorithms and stuff. And then he looks at me and he's like, they make it sound so important. I looked at him and I was like, well, you're talking about understanding big O and proving that your algorithm fits within a certain, scaling big O. And I was like, they'll ask you that in the interview and then you'll never use it. And, it was just funny. A lot of the other stuff he's talking about with these proofs, he's like, it's just really hard for me conceptually. And I was like, nobody's going to ask you about any of that stuff.
Yeah, or you're gonna find out that there's some real niche part of what they've covered that's going to be hugely important to your specific job, but you're never going to cover it in the depth that you need to know. And it's just too hard to predict exactly what that is. So the knowing how to learn, I think, is far more important than having a canon of knowledge, right?
Absolutely. And the other thing is so you work through all of those exercises, and what you really get out of that's useful is somebody's going to come to you and say, this algorithm's faster than that algorithm, and here's why. And you'll have some intuitive grasp of it because you've banged your head against the wall a whole bunch. But yeah, like memorizing all the stuff that you have to know to get through all your courses. A lot of that just really doesn't apply. And so it's kind of an interesting thing. I've also talked to a few people and they're like, well, if you look for people with a computer science degree? And I'm like, well, if I had somebody with even 2 years of experience versus a green graduate, I'd hire the person with 2 years of experience. Right?
Yeah. Yep, exactly.
They know the game. I'd still have to teach the computer science grad what in the heck he's doing,
Yeah, and I think especially if you're looking at the web and JavaScript industry, I think it's increasingly becoming the case where if I'm going to chat with somebody who's just coming out with a degree, it's like, great, you get a degree, but I'm going to be asking, what open source projects have you been contributing to? Understanding how how we come up with JavaScript, how the standards bodies work, how the different technologies work, and having that understanding, because that's far more important to being able to be innovative. It's not even knowing necessarily this framework or that framework, but it's knowing the industry, knowing how to contribute, how to work in a team, and if you've been doing sort of standalone solo projects by yourself and you haven't been working with a team of people where you have to justify why you think something is the way it needs to be, and you don't have that proof of that you can do that, then you're never gonna, nobody is an island unto themselves in the world that it is today. You have to work with other people, and that's far more important than having, knowing whether a bubble sort is quicker than
Yep. Yeah, all of that said, you get to maybe 4 or 5 years experience versus, 2 or 3 years experience and a computer science degree. I mean, now you're really starting to, okay, what advantage does that give them, because they've actually been out in the industry and learned all the lessons we just talked about. And so it's okay, does the computer science grad have something from their degree that gives them an edge over this other person, and then you have all the other things to consider, personality and team fit and, how they work and whether or not they know the frameworks or tools that you're using and all that stuff. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting conversation. But I think early on, it can help you and it can hurt you, and it just depends on where you wind up.
Yeah.
So anyway, so you're out there in the world, you're doing the Radio Shack and then the consulting stuff. How did you get to JavaScript?
Another sort of interesting story. I was working on a consulting project, and we had this. It was a really complex system that we were putting in, and I had a fair amount of spare time because I was basically employed as an insurance policy if anything went wrong, and which was fine, but it gave me a time to sort of experiment. And we had these giant log files, and this is before the days of Splunk and all of that. It was back in 2008, and I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to parse these log files, extract a bunch of information that we needed out of them, but I needed some way of displaying the information of these analysis of the log files. And I'm like, oh, okay, I want to learn web applications is JavaScript stuff, right? So I was, and I'm not going to make it a thin client application as we used to call them in the, back then. And I'm not going to do this Java stuff, and make it really complex. I want to do it native JavaScript, HTML. I'm going to challenge myself. So, I started looking at, what, the state of JavaScript in 2008 and trying to figure out how I could create a whole web application, thin client application, using just JavaScript and HTML. And that's what I did. And that's how I started getting involved. I ended up using Dojo 1 as the framework, which is what led me to getting involved in Dojo as a whole, and understanding a lot more about JavaScript than I ever did. So, previous to that, I had always stuck with obscure languages because I didn't actually want to have programming as my day job. Because I wanted to do architecture, and,
right?
All these sort of things. So I learned Turbo Pascal in high school, and then I did Delphi, and nobody was really employing Delphi developers a huge amount. There was some, but it was just enough to keep me grounded in programming concepts. And then the JavaScript, it was sort of accidental that actually stumbled upon something. But even in 2008, it wasn't as crazy popular as it is these days. So it was still a bit of an edge niche skill. But then what happened was about 2 years later, I ended up getting an opportunity to go into management full time. But it was away from my home. My home was in London. The work was up in Scotland. And so in the evenings, I had nothing better to do than get involved in the open source communities, and started dealing a lot with JavaScript. And during the day, I was a useless technology manager, running departments of software engineers, and in the evenings, I was, hacking on JavaScript. So
nice. I'm curious, what was it about JavaScript or Dojo that kept you interested, as opposed to, you mentioned Delphi and some of these other languages, what made you go, oh, this is where I want to work and live and play now?
Well, I think even back in 2008, it started to look like web applications were becoming a thing, right? And everybody, there was the early days of people trying to strive to build full applications in a browser, but for me, a lot of it was the challenge of actually working in an open source project. And because I didn't have it as my day job, it really became a hobby for me. And, it's like somebody messing around with a Raspberry Pi in their spare time. And so that's really what, and the whole bit of how we develop things in open source, right? That became a really intriguing thing for me, especially because my day job was managing large teams of software engineers,
right.
Understanding how teams work and how open source works, and dealing with those sort of challenges of you've got 20 different opinions, especially when it's open source and you've got all of these different opinions and nobody's necessarily right. Or everybody's right? And how do you navigate that? And how do you actually get people who are, some are commercially employed, some are doing it for, in their spare time like I was, right? And how do you deal and motivate those people? And that's what kind of became somewhat interesting, is in addition to the technical aspects of the fact that it was becoming more and more important every year that we went on.
Right. Huh. It's funny because usually you talked about, the types of problems you could solve and the community. And a lot of times when I ask people, what was it about the technology that you use that brings you in, they'll mention, it gets an honorable mention. I really like the community. I felt like the ecosystem was healthy, whatever. But usually there's some thing in the ecosystem, in the technology itself that really grabs people. So I think it's interesting that for you, it was the challenge and the, just the opportunity to solve some of these problems.
Well, and I think for me too it didn't, because of the situation it was and what I was looking at it as a hobby, that the what I could do with it was interesting, right? Building applications where I didn't have to install anything. That was the attractive aspect of it to me from solving that problem, right? Where we'd gone from this place where everybody you have to install this, and well, if you're on a Mac you can't use it, and, so this sort of or what version of JVM are you running, and and this was the thing is the browser was just making it possible for you to write something that anybody could use, right? And that was attractive. But yeah, the particular aspects of it, I'm still, I think even Brendan has stated this a lot of times, right? Is the language, especially JavaScript, wasn't necessarily invented for what it's doing today, right? And we've made a lot of improvements to the language, but if we were to throw everything away and start and write something from scratch again, it wouldn't be JavaScript, right? But it's kind of the thing we have to live with, and we can make it better, and we have been making it better, but it's not the best language in the world.
No, definitely not. But at the same time, it is fun to code in. So one thing that I'm curious before I get into the next kind of phase of your career is, you mentioned that writing an app where you don't have to install major backend systems or, Java or, things like that. The web has become much, much more that way where, you can spin up a couple of microservices either in a Docker container or on AWS Lambda or Microsoft Azure Functions or something like that, to the point where, even more. And then you bring in services like Firebase or Auth0 or, some of these other services that actually handle some of these issues that traditionally would require you to stand up your own back end. And I'm not going to pretend that those systems aren't a back end of a sort, I guess. But the difference is that, I don't have to go and bang my head against the wall figuring that stuff out. Now, I'm an old Ruby on Rails developer, and I kind of like building my own back end, but it's it's fascinating to me that now I can write a complete app without ever worrying about what my back-end code looks like. Well beyond where it was in 2008. Is that something that's interesting or exciting to you? Or have you kind of come back around to, you know what? Sometimes you just darn it need your own back end that you built yourself.
Well, I mean, the sort of serverless movement, I think, is something that we're not going to. It's a direction that we're going. Just as much as the sort of universality that we've started to head towards in the front end, that sort of serverless type of architectures are going to mature and become, and that sort of friction that you have of setting up these business systems are going to be a heck of a lot easier, right? And I think that's only going to continue. And I think it's really exciting. I think the challenge, and a lot of this was, in sort of previous roles too, is especially when you start to, there's a maturity, right? And what usually happens with these things that I've seen, we did it in the browser. I mean, if you look at sort of IE 6 and 7 and 8 and and we had Firefox and Chrome, and we had this sort of, back in 2008, it was this horrible mess of potholes and things. And we're kind of at the point today with the front end technologies that we have tools like Babel and TypeScript and other things which are making that a little bit making it easier to adopt things early, right. Not have to worry about all of that sort of stuff. I think there's going to be a maturity that we go through in the sort of serverless bit too, where we have things, especially when you scale in large bits. It's okay, it's great, yeah, I can do a command line, but when I'm actually doing a real time situation where I've suddenly gone from 10 users to 1 million users in 12 months because my app's really popular, and we haven't solved all those scalability issues, and does it become cost effective when you're paying per compute, and how do you measure the effectiveness of that pay per compute to the point where you're not getting buried in bills because suddenly some Ukrainian hacker has decided to bit mine your functions because you've left the back door open, and you've got a $1 million bill from Amazon or Microsoft because you've been hacked. These are the sort of I think challenges that there's going to be a maturity that we have to go through. So it's really exciting, but I don't think we've gotten the maturity that we need. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting seeing where it's going. And, I go to events and they talk about it, and I don't think we're quite arrived yet. I think there's still pieces that we have to figure out. And a lot of this it's functional, it's powerful, and it's a little bit clunky. And so, I think we're going to just work through some of these issues, but eventually it'll be interesting to see where we wind up as far as, how we start to break down apps and where we decide that we really want to go serverless versus, where we want a traditional back-end system on some of these systems. So moving on to the next question that I have, and that is, you're the CTO at SitePen. So how do you go from, okay, I kind of built this app that was, kind of a serverless app with Dojo 1 to CTO at SitePen where they're actually building Dojo?
Well, and a lot of it was, Dylan is CEO at SitePen and was sort of co-founder of Dojo 1, and we kept in touch. We became friends over that time period, and he kept telling me that I should leave my big corporate job managing large departments of technology people and get my hands dirty and become a hands-on CTO for him. And he kept kept at me for years. And finally, I said, okay, fine, I'll do it. And I was a little bit apprehensive, because while I had sort of, contributed to that, I was joining a company where the engineers, were, had been doing JavaScript and working, with JavaScript frameworks for extended periods of time. And, here, I had never actually been paid as a day job to do programming, just pure programming, right? It had always been sort of a side hustle
right.
in everything that I did. So, I was kind of intimidated whether I'd be able to pull my weight or not. But all of that sort of extracurricular activity that I had done over the years seemed to pay off, and especially sort of I think partly sort of understanding the bigger macro problems. I mean, because almost anything's solvable in code, right?
Right.
But understanding what problems to solve and at what priority are actually the sort of challenges that you really run into, and some of the technical details are easy to pick up. Some of them are frustrating, like most of CSS. But in a lot of ways, you can if you understand how to solve problems. And that's what about 2 years ago, I started. I took over the project lead for Dojo 2, and it's been a team effort where we've had some really switched on people that have been sort of looking at the patterns that we've seen out there, and because a lot of it, and like we talked about on the other podcast, is it's kind of crazy thinking about writing a framework, and why would we do it? Just because Dojo 1 was kind of a bit niche, but fairly popular back 4, 5, 6 years ago. What makes you think that you can write a framework? And we've continued to still have realistic expectations that in a lot of ways, part of it is it helps us understand the problems that we face in working with other clients, right? And particularly dealing with those higher order problems that are above the sort of language, right? Yep. And there's lots of ways to solve those problems, and I think we see that in the sort of landscape of frameworks to bare vanilla JS movement, and all those sort of things. And I mean personally, I think there's just a lot of rhetoric in almost all of those things where it's like React is the best thing, and we've kind of ended up in this sort of intimidation war, I think, to a lot of degrees, where a lot of people who aren't very familiar are like, well, wait a minute, am I doing it wrong because I'm using vanilla JS? Or am I doing it wrong because I'm using Angular 5, or well, we're actually using Angular JS, and is that a bad thing? And and I think we think with Dojo 2 that we have taken a lot of the patterns that we like and tried to harden them a bit to make them a bit easier to use by large teams, and in ways that we think complement that large team environment where not everybody is a 10-year expert in web application development, right? Mm-hmm. But even if at the end of the day it doesn't become popular, that's great. I mean, we've started using it we've got several client projects where we're using it now, and we like building applications with it. I mean, that was one of the big things that we wanted to do, was have something that we were comfortable building customer applications with, and then hoping that that maybe other people wanted to do it too. But at the moment, we're building applications we're really proud of for our customers, which was kind of our main objective with doing what we did.
That makes sense. I'm curious, like what part of the process of building something like Dojo or Dojo 2 are you the most proud of with you and your team?
I think the thing that I'm most proud of is I think the first 9 months or so, it was really challenging because we had a lot of client work. And so the rest of the SitePen team weren't available to work on open source. And so it was basically me for about 9 months. And Dylan kept saying, oh, we'll get, we looked for some more people. Plus, we knew that our client work always goes in cycles and, that we'd get freed up. And I think the thing that was really challenging to begin with was it was just my ideas, right? And it was, there was very few people that I had an opportunity to talk to, and that actually really caused a lot of, I think, a lot of challenges, and it's probably taken partly why it's taken us a lot longer than we had planned, because once we got some availability and we got a few more people on board, that team dynamic starts to come in where you're not the only person in there. And so I think the thing that I'm really proud of is if you look at the a commit history, right, and the contribution history, there's not any one of us that have been working on it that we dominate the code base, right? And in fact, strangely, it sounds a bit odd, but I really believe in this is we probably, with every major part of Dojo 2, we've probably rewritten it twice or three times at this point, right? Right. Because we've learned so much by throwing away code, right? And if there was anything that I'm proud of is we've thrown away a lot of code.
Nice. Yeah, it's funny because on my calendar today, it actually has a code cleanup for a SaaS product that I'm working on. And yeah, that's the plan. I'm going to delete like a ton of crap. and yeah. It's like, oh, here we go, and yeah, it's gratifying. It's like, you know what? I solved all these problems, and now all of this other stuff can go away.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's healthy. In retrospect, I would probably plan in more sort of just do a proof of concept, throw it away, do another proof of concept, throw it away, and then third time write it. Because it's usually that you learn so much off the first one, and then the second one you're like, oh, I think I know what I'm doing, and it's usually by the third time that you're rewriting an area of functionality that you're like, oh, okay, yeah, now I know what I need to do.
Yep. So one other thing that I am wondering, you're in kind of a management role. You're in a management role. You're CTO. So how much time do you spend actually writing code? It sounds like you still get to do a fair bit of that versus doing all of the other stuff that's involved in managing a team or managing the projects and doing all of the other stuff that comes with being in charge of the technical portion of what SitePen does. It varies a little bit, but I would say overall, it's about 50% of my time is directly involved in the code. Probably 25-30% of it is cutting code, the remaining 50% is reviews and. And code reviews and and talking through problems and but directly solving acute problems, and actually it's probably a bit more than 50% because we've been trying to focus on getting it done, but at the same time sort of being the project lead as well too, sort of prioritization of our backlog and and all that sort of stuff is stuff that I've had to deal with as well, which is it's the thing I like the least about it, but it's probably the thing that is the most valuable to any particular project, is that sort of prioritizing the work and working through the backlog. So yep, I totally hear that. We're kind of at the end of the time that I had scheduled for this. I do have a couple more things that I typically like to cover on these shows. One of them is just giving you a chance to talk about what you're working on now. If there's anything, we talked a bit about Dojo 2 and SitePen. Do you have any other side projects you want to bring up?
Well, it's a Dojo 2 project, but I guess I'm proud of it because it's the thing I get to work on pretty much. Well, there's another one of the team that are working on it now, but it was mostly me. So it's somewhat crazy, but it's one of the biggest challenges that we know that we'll have for Dojo 2 is being able to experience it, especially because it's very much focused on TypeScript. It's really sort of it's for building full web apps, right? So it's a fairly complex thing to do, and trying to make that easy for developers to experience without having to go through sort of a weeks-long training process. And so I've been working on sort of in-browser editing environment so that you can get sort of live code examples with all the good TypeScript completion and right. All of that. So that's kind of the big thing that I'm working on. And I'll paste the link in there of a work in progress at the moment, which I'm sure you'll share. That's awesome. Kind of the big thing. And I mean, I've been working on development. We know we're getting to the point where we need that wrap in order to do it. So I'm working on a development tool. So it's all the sort of non-core stuff I'm getting the time to do now to try right. to make it actually usable.
Nice. The other question I have is if people want to follow you on Twitter or see what you're working on, follow you on GitHub, that kind of stuff. Maybe you have a blog, or maybe there's a blog for SitePen or Dojo. Where do people go to kind of see what you're thinking about these days?
Yeah, so Twitter and GitHub are both Kitson, Kitsonk, and Dojo 2 is the landing point is dojo.io. There's a blog on there, and then sitepen.com. We've got a blog on there as well too. So those are the main stopping points.
Awesome. And then the last section of the show, and you've been on JavaScript Jabber, so you've experienced this before, but we do picks. So do you have some things you want to shout out about today? Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says "Pay me now." And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section.
Yes. Partly because I've been working on front-end UIs for things and needing a fair amount of icons. And Jake Archibald has taken SVG, the SVG command line tool for compressing them, and he several months ago made a GitHub repo that allows you to upload your SVGs and optimize the heck out of them. So it's jakearchibald.github.io/svgomg. It's super handy for taking SVGs and reducing their size, which is just dead useful. Which, of course, the other shout out that or other pick that I've got is if you ever need and need to feel inspired for an icon or something like that, the Noun project has every icon that you can think of, the nounproject.com, and it's a relatively small fee that you can pay to get all of the icons available for royalty free. And if you ever feel like you like looking for exactly the right sort of icon for something, that is definitely useful.
Awesome. I'm going to jump in here with a few picks myself. The first one is, so I mentioned that I'm working on a SaaS product. And basically what it is it's a management platform for podcasts. And it was funny because yesterday I didn't want to stop working. I volunteered to go help my son's scout group with swimming. And I was like, I don't want to put it down, but it's just nice when you kind of get that thing working in some way. And anyway, some of the technology that I'm using on that, interestingly enough, has just been Ruby on Rails and jQuery. But one of the things that I pulled in that was very, very handy is admin LTE. And you can find it at adminlte.io, which is just a nice layout for admin stuff. And they've got built-in, reporting pieces and things like that so that people can get in and you can build a dashboard for them, which is kind of the next stage in that particular product. I'm also just going to shout out about the product. If you are a podcaster and you're looking right now, all it does is manage sponsorships. It has some calendar features for planning future episodes, but it's pretty basic right now. It's just what's the episode, when does it release, and then the sponsorships for those episodes. But you can go check it out at podwrench.com. I'm hoping to update the front page over the next few days so that it actually doesn't look like just a just a template, but anyway, that's what I'm using now to manage all of the sponsorships. It's been really, really nice to move all that stuff over. So anyway, I'm just going to throw that out there as well. And then one last thing that I'm just going to shout out about as far as a lot of the serverless stuff goes, we do have an episode coming out. I think it comes out about the same time as this one. This episode might come out a week or two later. I need to look at the calendar and I haven't. But we talked about serverless with Gareth McCumsky. He's a guy from South Africa that had a bunch of experience with serverless, and it was a really great conversation. So if you're interested in any of that, go check that episode out as well. And then also check out the information that we got from Microsoft Connect. We've released a few of those episodes on JavaScript Jabber, and a lot of times we wind up talking to them about Azure and what Azure offers, and they offer a lot of serverless stuff. So, it's at least worth looking at, even if you're not a Microsoft fan or you're using something else like AWS. It at least gives you some ideas about how they think about arranging a lot of that stuff. So anyway, those are my picks. Kitson, thank you for coming and talking to us.
No problem. It was a good pleasure.
All right. Well, I'm going to jump off because I have another one of these interviews in a few minutes and I got to get ready for that. But thanks for all of your contributions and, looking forward to having you on the shows in the future.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.